Welcome, boys and girls. Christine here with a discussion about the future of Total War. To just give you a quick read on exactly what Creative Assembly has revealed in their 25th anniversary celebration. Because there are a lot of details that they did share throughout that entire segment. But I'm just going to keep it short. Yes, I went there. And I'm going to focus on the broader picture. There's quite a lot of things over there, and honestly, it was fairly long. I did find it very interesting, and I'm the kind of guy who doesn't like going through these kind of videos in general, but this one, I was sitting there, I was watching it, I was paying attention, and honestly, I think I probably will have to watch it again several times to get all of those details. But let's start with probably the most important thing in that showcase. The announcement that wasn't. See, a lot of us expected, and pretty much what Creative Assembly had stated, that they were going to announce a new fantasy title. Now, the general consensus among many people is that the next fantasy title is going to be Warhammer 40k. They didn't announce that, but they did say they're going to reveal it at the Game of the Year Awards show. Now, this is a pretty big deal, because this is marketing, and one of the things I've always stated with leaks is that leaks are only true in the moment. They're not true even a day after, a week after, months after. And when you add in marketing, PR, etc., things can change very, very quickly. And if it is going to be 40k, I think it makes sense for it to be shown at the Game of the Year Awards show. That also, however, indicates whatever game they are doing is going to be a big deal. Because I imagine getting a trailer slot at the Game of the Year Award show is probably very expensive and not necessarily easy to do. The fact that Creative Assembly and Sega have decided to do that indicates to me that it is a big project. I still believe it's 40k. I think every bit of evidence that we have out there indicates it's going to be 40k, and the person they chose to talk about that, just to announce an announcement, is also someone who's worked on the Jupiter Incident video game, which is a sci-fi space combat game. He was a tester, worth pointing out. Now he is in charge of the next big fantasy title of Total War. Just a point worth mentioning. Moving on to Nagash. So Nagash was the star of the show. And with these kind of shows, I think it makes sense to not go with two big announcements at once. I mean, there were big announcements, let's be clear on that. But there's got to be a limit. That's something I can say as a creator. With Nagash, they're going to do an End Times DLC / expansion, whatever name you want to use. They'll probably use the name DLC, but we'll have to find out on that. So we're going to have Nagash, we're going to have Neferata, we're going to have Valak, Harkon, Blood Dragons, who he ended up joining Nurgle in the End Times. Might be a legendary hero, might be a legendary lord. Now, unless I'm mistaken, and keep in mind this was fairly long, but they did say it's going to be Nagash and 3 other legendary lords. It's not just going to be Nagash and 2 others. They didn't say that, but I might be reading that wrong. The leak we got earlier this year indicated it was going to be Nagash and 4 others. Tankwol, Valton, Galotkin, and a Caphane Lord. They probably decided, okay, we're going to go with 4 as opposed to 5. Makes some sense. Maybe a free DLC legendary lord. They're doing a lot, though. So the way the trailer starts is when Nagash is brought back. So you have High Elves fighting undead forces under Manfred and Arkhan. You have Arkhan and Manfred bending the knee. Well, as much as Manfred bends the knee to anyone, because that's Manfred. He wouldn't bend the knee to anyone, really, unless he was forced to. And Nagash doesn't take no for an answer quite seriously on that. But regardless, you do have Nagash being brought back. You do have his confrontation, etc., when he gains the power of the Black Pyramid and literally becomes a god at that point in the End Times events, in the End Times storyline. And everything else that happens. Him taking control of the undead, getting Luthor, so Vampire Coast, Vampire Counts, Tomb Kings. Now, they didn't talk about the Vampire Coast, though they clearly showed Luthor Archon and the Vampire Coast. But they did talk specifically about the Vampire Counts and the Tomb Kings, the additions they're going to add for Tomb Kings and the Vampire Counts. And they also show Neferata, who was fighting Chaos Dwarves. So the theory I've had for a while, ever since Chaos Dwarves were added into the game and Darklands were changed, is that they were going to use the Silver Pinnacle as a starting position for Neferata. Well, you might as well consider that confirmed, just with that small section that they showed. Beyond that, they also did a campaign flyover and talked about like a new type of endgame scenario, and a more gradual one, which I think is very important considering the way the endgame is currently handled in Total War Warhammer 3. So you will have end time situations. They talked about Archeon. They talked about Nagash looking to kill everyone and revive them under him. Because that is the kind of guy Nagash is. If you think Manfred is a terrible person, and he is, let's just say Nagash makes him look like a saint. Like, seriously, the entire storyline of Nagash is, how awful can you be? Not just as a person. I think Nagash has transcended being a villain into something worse. But suffice to say, it took the Skaven. I'm serious on this. It took the Skaven becoming heroes to stop Nagash. The Skaven. The same Skaven we all know. They weren't different. They're still the same Skaven. And they thought, we gotta stop this guy. So they literally risked their lives and threw themselves and fought against Nagash with everything they had to stop him, just because it would have been that terrible. And by the way, that didn't just happen in Nagash's origin story, it also happened in the end times. Let's just say Ikekla blew up Nagash's Black Pyramid. He was not particularly happy about that specific outcome. They did talk about storylines, they did talk about various events, they did talk about map changes, lots of details, lots of things. They did show Warpstone, very importantly, because remember, the leak indicated that it would be Tanquil. Nothing on Valtan, nothing on the Empire, but there was discussion on Archeon, there was discussion on Nagash. But the whole Warpstone they showed on the map, specifically Warpstone craters? Yeah, that's when the Skaven blew up the moon just because they're sad losers against the Lizardmen. And it's like, okay, you win, Lizardmen. We're going to destroy Illustria by blowing up the moon. Seriously, that's the Skaven special. So that's when Nagash, again, lots of different details to cover with that. But let's move on to the next part. The next big thing they showed was the new engine, Warforge. That's what they're calling it. And they've talked about animations, they've talked about giving developers tools to work on, hardware scaling, and they're also going to make it work on consoles. Now, you might think that's a bad thing. Personally, I think it's perfectly fine. There's a couple of reasons behind that. One, we have seen with games like Age of Mythology, which does require a lot of micro, how it can work on consoles with controllers. And on top of that, making it on consoles means that optimization will be taking a priority, because that's one of the things you need with consoles, that kind of optimization, game running better, at least in theory. Of course, that the fact that many console games don't do that is a different discussion. But to be honest, one of the things to be said about Warhammer 3, and even Troy or Pharaoh, especially Troy and Pharaoh actually, the performance of the current engine is much better than one might think. Like, Warhammer 3 has problems because it's Warhammer 1 plus 2 plus 3. But when you look at Pharaoh, when you look at Troy, you can see a lot of performance potential in the current engine. Now you add a new engine, DirectX 12, all new technologies, Havoc physics, etc. There are a lot of possibilities, and maybe even new tools for modders to use. So, pretty interested in seeing what the engine is going to do. They were showing medieval buildings, which is pretty important because they also announced Medieval 3. Now, it is going to come out later than perhaps I would have expected. I did kind of always feel like Medieval 3 was either going to be early 2026 or it was going to be later than 2026. I never expected Medieval 3 to come out in late 2026, to be absolutely certain on that. the reason I ever expect that, because I expect 40K or whatever fantasy game they're working on to come out there. But it's in pre-production. They didn't really have anything to show for that except the trailer, which CGI, live action, I couldn't really tell. I think it's some live action mocap with CGI from my perspective on that subject. Could be wrong. Let me know what you guys think. But yeah, they did talk about Medieval 3, what they're looking to do. They had the developer discussion with Cody. Lore Master of Sotek handled the Nagash part. Cody handled the Medieval 3 part. And they were talking about different scenarios. They haven't chosen a start date for that, but they talked about Barbarossa. They talked about the Angevin Empire, Eleanor of Aquitaine, Richard the Lionheart, Saladin, many other people in history. I think this is where they should take the idea that they had for Free Kingdoms and improve on it specifically, with different starting dates for a campaign scenario. Like you could have the earliest one and then later on, but you are going to have the Byzantine Empire. You are going to have the Angevin Empire. Angevin Empire was basically England and most of France. I'm not joking on that. Yes, England once ruled most of France, or rather the dynasty in charge of England. That's basically what Richard the Lionheart actually did. He wasn't just famous for, Robin Hood tie-in and Crusades. No, this guy controlled one of the most powerful nations in Europe at the time, and that is no joke. And he had probably more direct control than Barbarossa. But yeah, Richard Lionheart, Barbarossa, so Third Crusade most likely, that clash between Barbarossa, or his attempt at a clash with Saladin, didn't quite end up working. But yeah, Third Crusade, Jerusalem, implicit with regards to that. Nothing with regards to Mongols, as far as I could see, but, you can always expect that. Maybe early firearms. Again, not a lot of details, not a lot of things shared. They did have some discussions about, history, and they did show some art, not necessarily game assets, so very early stage with regards to that. And the timeline that they've given for this, here's my expectation. They might do a Neferata DLC early next year if they want to separate her from the Nagash DLC, which, by the way, they have pretty much mentioned that separation in their blog post on single lord packs. Nagash is not going to be a single lord pack. So they might do Neferata earlier, have her campaign roll in, the clash between her and Khalida, and also Forik, funnily enough, in the end times, or keep that for the end times part. Then they're going to do Nagash in summer of 2026. What summer means, hard to say. It's unlikely to be July. When you hear a developer talking about summer, there's really two big periods there. It's either going to be early June or it's going to be late August. I would much prefer early June, but it depends on how things unfold. Hopefully there isn't a delay this time around. Regardless, that's what we can expect with Neferata. If they do her separate from the Nagash DLC, they didn't talk about her, but they clearly showed her in the trailer. I mean, that is her. That is her end times model, specifically. So yeah, summer 2026, Nagash. We probably get the next Fantasy Total War game in late 2026. The big question I have, and I'm sure a lot of people have, as creators, as fans, etc., what are they going to do until then? So that's the thing. What is going to come out in, say, February, late February, early March 2026? When in summer are we going to be talking about Nagash? When's the next big fantasy game? Timeline could change, of course. Who knows? Maybe the next big fantasy game is ready to come out in a couple of months. Hard to say. Maybe it comes out not even in 2026. Hard to say. But yeah, that's pretty much the big picture mode. So Nagash DLC, new engine, Medieval free, and an announcement at the Game of the Year Awards coming in just over a week. That's the reason they probably removed that. Just makes sense, really. Like from the standpoint of selling a product, They could have loaded everything up in a single video, but it's actually smarter. There's going to be more eyeballs at the Game of the Year award show. They're going to build up hype. That's probably their strategy. That's all I had to say for the moment. There's a lot more things to unpack. But Christine here signing out. Stay tuned for more. Let me know what you guys think about all of this. Are you interested? Are you excited? Are you happy? What are your feelings on the whole subject?